But the thing is, one of the things he pushed back on a bit is, I think, this idea of the housing theory of everything, that everything comes down to planning. Because he points out that, like, the planning system didn't suddenly get 5 times worse in 2008. It did, that had existed for decades and decades. Now, the Greenbelt had expanded, but that wasn't something new in 2008. So what he was trying to do was, okay, what is new since 2008? And the main thing he focused on is credit. So credit for non-financial businesses particularly. So, one of the causes, or the causes that people sort of ascribed to the financial crisis in 2008, was banks taking too much risk, lending out too much money that they shouldn't have. And so a lot of financial reforms were imposed after 2008, basically saying that if you're a bank, you have to if you're a big bank, you have to go through lots of stress testing, and you have to have, higher capital requirements, which means banks have to put more money into really, really safe assets like government bonds. It also means that the less appealing side of it is that it means they're less likely to be lending out to new businesses, because new businesses almost by definition are risky. And so he put up on the screen an incredibly depressing graph where it's basically UK bank lending to non-financial businesses since the 1990s. And it's all in real terms, so inflation is accounted for. And it goes up and up and up until about 2008. Then it crashes for a bit. Then it slowly sort of goes back up, but then it stagnates. So today, 15 years after the original credit crunch, banks are lending about as much money to non-financial business as they were back then. And this creates a lot of problems, because if firms cannot borrow money, it means can't borrow, the amount of money they need to like invest in new machinery or training or whatever, or expand their workforce. It's really, really difficult to get productivity up. So this is the sort of thing he fixed on. And he makes a point that this is not just an issue in Britain. It's an issue across a lot of European countries, in large part because of the way our banking systems are set up. In most European countries, you have a small number of big banks who deal with, most lending. And because they're big, they have a lot of regulatory requirements, because governments are very worried that they don't want them to have to bail them out again. Whereas what's different about the United States is that you have just a huge number of smaller, more local banks. So he was pointing out, in the US, you have 5,000 banks that lend to business across the country. In Britain, on paper, it's like 250, but I would imagine that like 10 of those will account for the vast majority of that. And so in the US, because you have lots of these smaller banks, they're not burdened with all this, stress testing and stuff. Which means that they're more able to lend to business, and you also have more, venture capital and that side of things. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was a really interesting perspective. I wouldn't, I think he probably underplayed the effect of rising energy prices. So industrial electricity is now like 3 times more expensive in real terms than it was 3.5 times more expensive than it was in 2004. And that's not, it was already like that before the war in Ukraine, and now it's just got worse. So he didn't really focus on that, but I thought it was a really interesting perspective.